Welcome to the Raging Heart On podcast. I'm your host, Brian Banks. Today we're going to talk about these fucking feelings with TJ Woodward. And I'm so excited. Actually spent this morning watching videos of TJ. What an incredible speaker. What incredible insight he has. So I'm excited to share this with you guys because he kind of got me in a mood, like in my feels this morning. I didn't tell him that, but welcome, TJ. And thank you for agreeing to do this with me.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Brian. I'm so happy to be here. And I love that you watched videos, so that'll give us something to talk about, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was, you're such a great public speaker. And I love how you break things down. And there's this sense of compassion in your voice when you're speaking. It sort of reminds me of youth camp, but without the shame at the end. So that was, it was really cool just hearing your story and what led you to wanting more in life and what led you to really creating all these beautiful things that you're doing today. So yeah, I appreciate that. I loved listening just to your story.
Thank you. Yeah, it's amazing where our journeys take us and where they lead us ultimately, right? And everything that's happened in my life has really brought me to a moment of knowing that I really want to share this with the world because I had so much shame. I felt so disconnected from myself. I had so much trauma that was unresolved, and I carried that with me for so many years. And now it's just truly an honor to share that with the world and offer people some, not really hope, because it's not really hope. It's really a possibility of a different way of living.
Yeah, I've spent this year reading a lot of self-help books and, growing and doing therapy. And some of what you were talking, it's like everything I've been reading was in the videos I was watching with you today, just the power of I am, the power of letting go of the ego. And I know for me, all of the negative self-talk, and it's a struggle today. Like I am in that moment where you realize you're doing it and you don't know where it's coming from. And some of it is so basic that, yeah, I really appreciated some of your talks on that.
Oh, thank you. It's so fundamental to the work that I do because I realized in my own journey, of course, and then in many years of working with clients, that we are really all carrying around this narrative that can keep us feeling stuck. The issue is a lot of times, first of all, like you said, a lot of times we don't even know it's there. Once we're aware of it, and in my experience, when I was aware of it, it was actually more painful because I was aware it was happening, but I also didn't know what to do with it or how to actually change it. And I think a lot of times people say things like change the narrative, have a new story. But like it's much deeper than that, right? Because it's something that we developed very early in life, most of us. And it's much more than just a narrative. It's actually an energy that we're carrying. And it's like you said, it's what I'm attaching my I am to. I am broken. I am damaged. I'm not good enough. And we've become so accustomed to doing that we literally create grooves in our brain where that's our operating system, and we can't really change it just by saying get a new story. It really is about going much deeper and looking at the origins of it.
Well, and I will say, like, I went through some things last year, and which really made me question, like, what is wrong with me? Why am I seeking this validation? Why am I not happy? Why am I not feeling joy? I have the house. I have all the things that I thought were going to make me whole. I've told this story on the podcast earlier this season, but there was a moment last summer at the beach that I'm looking at the ocean. I'm in a beautiful condo with my friends, and I looked at everybody and said, why can't I feel this? How am I here and I can't feel this? And it really led to a inner work that I have been doing this year. And I would say this work's been going on 15 years. But just a deeper dive into what's not healed in me, what is triggering some of these negative thoughts? Why do I not love myself the way I should love myself? And how can I tap back into that beautiful little creative fucker I was when I was a kid? Because he was amazing and scared. And so, yeah, hearing you talk about connecting back to that perfect person you were,
Yeah.
um, it really hit home to me because I know a lot of people have self hate, but for me, I look back at that kiddo and I don't think he was bad. He was so misunderstood, but I have so much love and respect for that kiddo. And he was able to keep his joy for a long time, in spite of the
Yeah.
world around him not playing into that joy.
Yeah, the deeper work for me, and as you're describing what you experienced, I think so many people have that moment. And the basic philosophy or the basic understanding of my work, including conscious recovery, is that we come into the world as a whole and perfect being. And then we get programmed by the world to believe that we're damaged or broken. And most of that programming is quite unconscious. I don't think most people think I'm going to damage my child. They just pass down the trauma from generations, right? The way of living, that, what it means to be on planet Earth. And we end up separating from the truth of who we are, or at least we believe we separated. But we have all these layers then of shame, of disconnection, of trauma. And then we start deciding these massive things about ourselves. And as I said before, that becomes the operating system. It's like we literally can't see anything other than this lens that we're looking at life through. And so the deeper work, and I love that you had that moment, because for a lot of people, when we feel disconnected internally, we look to the world to feel whole again. And it's like we have our umbilical cord in our hand and we're trying to plug in, whether that's a relationship or sex or shopping or drugs or alcohol. I mean, the list can go on, and it can work temporarily, right?
Yeah,
And then we can become addicted to that. But we have these moments, and it sounds like it was a powerful moment for you. And that was true for me too, well into my recovery, when I looked around and I said, I have everything I thought that I would require to be happy. And yet the internal experience hasn't changed. And so that's an opportunity for us to say, okay, what is that deeper work? And how do I go in and actually heal from that place of origin? Because as little
yeah,
kids, our brains aren't even developed enough to understand what's happening. So we make these massive decisions and we absorb the energy of the people around us when we're really, really young. And so the work isn't just cognitive, it's something much deeper.
absolutely. Yeah, and that moment was a precursor to me making some really terrible mistakes
Mm,
um, in my relationship. I have, you know, when the world's looking, I have a nice house. I have a partner. We have so much fun. We travel the world. We are doing all these great things. But there was an unhealed part of me that was still seeking. If he didn't validate me, then I would find somebody that would.
yeah.
And I never wanted to hurt him, but I did. I did
Yeah.
hurt him, and
Yeah.
and I remember after that happened, he said, "How could you do this to me? How could you?" And I honestly answered, "I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with me, and I don't know why." And I got into therapy and started seeking things, and I was hoping them for the therapist to go, "This is why you did this. This is why." That's not what happened at all. It was me realizing through The Velvet Rage, that book, and through therapy that I was still living wrapped up in shame. And my value was coming from everybody around me. Whereas when I was younger, I just knew that I was good.
Yeah.
I was naive and I was good. And it has led to a better connection between us. And it has definitely led me to start connecting with me in a way that I never have before. Before I felt really sorry for myself for some of the things that happened to me.
Mm,
And yeah, now it's just me connecting with myself and how those things have affected me. And yeah, I was just moved this morning when you were discussing shame and just watching some of your videos. What is your website if people want to go watch your videos?
tjwoodward.com. Very simple. Yeah.
Some,
And I love that you're talking about shame because that to me is one of the root causes, really, of all the issues in the world, but certainly with addiction or any kind of relational issues, shame is often a driving force, right? And we know now enough about shame to know the difference between guilt and shame, right? Guilt is, I believe
yeah,
I've done something wrong. Shame is, I believe I'm fundamentally wrong in some way or broken. And what happens is we have this shame core, right? And then we start looking, as I said, we start looking to the world to try to heal that. But the issue is this. So, for example, if I believe I'm unlovable, and I think the solution is to find people to love me. I'm in this outer search, right? Please love me, please love me, please love me. But I will walk into a room and the core vibration of I'm not lovable will align with someone in the room to confirm the core false belief. All this is happening on an unconscious level. And we find ourselves saying things like, I thought this person was going to be different. I thought this job was going to be different. I thought this time I would be different. I keep going back to this same pattern. That's because the deeper unconscious is what's running the show, right? And I love that you talked about, you didn't quite say this, but like the difference between kind of blame and accountability. I remember feeling sorry for myself and blaming myself and people in my life that caused things that happened. You know, this is because this happened. And there's an interesting nuanced conversation, right? Blame is a really low form of consciousness, but accountability is like, no, this really hurt. This caused harm for me. But really, it's less about what happened and more about what I decided and absorbed. And when I get to
yes,
that, that's where I can start to heal it because we really don't heal it from the outside in as hard as some of us have tried.
absolutely. And I think, for especially for gay men, there is a very basic shame that is afforded us all.
Yeah.
Just because we grow up in this world that is not necessarily geared to make us proud of ourselves.
Yeah.
And there's this very basic shame. And then you add any trauma on top of that. I know for me, it was sexual abuse
Right.
at an early age. And trying to process that from a place of shame
Yeah.
only compounds the shame. And I can remember people asking me years ago, do you think that's what made you gay? And I'm like, no, but I think being gay made me a target
mm,
because I think they can spot the little boy that's trying to hide from the world. I think they can spot someone who can keep a secret.
mm,
And it all played into it, but those things happening to us, and there's a million different traumatic events that can happen in our lives, but when we have that very basic shame about just being who we are, like
yeah.
from birth, and then you add something traumatic on top of that, it is a web that is so hard to unweave.
Yeah. And talking about sexual trauma, I think it's an important conversation to have. I know a lot of times people don't talk about it. There's an inherent shame to having sexual trauma in our past, which is so interesting. And then we find ourselves saying things to something like to someone, it wasn't your fault. But that really isn't what one needs to hear. That's not how we heal. It really is much deeper than that. When a child is really young, our brains aren't developed, as I said earlier. So we're very much in black and white and concrete thinking. So if something happens that is painful or difficult, we end up blaming ourselves quite often. But again, it's not a cognitive process, so we can't really talk ourselves out of the shame. And you said something so powerful, and that is when we are in the shame, it's really difficult to heal the shame. And I have noticed that a lot of the modalities and support groups still have some degree of shame trying to heal shame, and it just doesn't work, right? So, you know, back in the day with tough love, back in the day with like setting boundaries, really firm boundaries, all of that can be, I suppose, important in some way. But if someone's carrying a lot of shame, and as you said, as gay men, we automatically really have it because we live in a culture that is changing rapidly. But for most of us, we still had a fundamental message. Some of us even got that God believes you're broken. I mean, that is a massive thing to believe as a little kid. And then we carry that around. You add something like sexual trauma, we end up blaming ourselves or having shame about it. And then we push it down into secrecy. And as we know, shame thrives in secrecy. And the way you work with shame is to create a safe place to start talking about it. And I'm really aware right now. One of the kind of a pivot for me is I'm really starting to look at men, all men who have any kind of trauma, who have not been talking about it, and
Hmm.
especially sexual trauma, right? Because I worked with a young man a couple of weeks ago, and he said, "Well, I should have been able to stop it. I'm a guy." Right. And there's still that consciousness. And so, we have to get down to what we absorbed and what we decided and start to heal it from that place. Give that child what they needed, which is a place to actually feel the pain of that situation instead of burying it. And even though that sounds very simple, it can be a very, very deep process for people. And it is because of the shame. So, as you said, we can't add more shame to it. When we have a starting point of underneath all that, you are still a whole and perfect being. That as a starting point is a much more easier. It's an easier way to access the healing of the shame.
Yeah. So that was the thing I hear you talk about. And it was one of those things in the video this morning that you're talking about tapping back into that perfect being that you were, because there is an undamageable, there is a place inside you that cannot be spoiled. And how do we tap back into that place?
Well,
Like, do
I'm
you
glad you
journal the fuck
asked.
out of yourself? Do you meditate till you levitate? Like, how do we tap into that place?
Yeah,
I have glimpses of that person.
yeah. A lot of us have glimpses of that. Like that might come as a spontaneous insight or a remembering, or maybe we're meditating and we have that experience where we recognize or remember that experience of being a very young pre-programmed human. So to me, the process is twofold. It is dedicating ourselves to spending time in the silence, as you said, whether that's a meditation practice, a walk in nature, putting that phone down for a while and just really feeling ourselves, right? Accessing all parts of ourselves, physical, intellectual, emotional, and then ultimately spiritual. That's one piece of it. And then the second piece is pretty much unlearning everything we've ever been taught that is counter to that belief. And if you look at the world, and it's not just for people who have addiction, or it's not just for people who have a mental health concern, it's for all humans. There's so much shame in the world that we are acting that out over and over and over again. You see it in politics, you see it in divisiveness within, red state, blue state. I mean, we just go on and on and on about all the different ways we divide. But the truth is, when we are separated from our true nature, or we believe we are, we see that in the world. So the two-step process, if you will, or twofold process, is spending time in the silence, feeling that energy core that is beneath all of the behavior. And then it's pretty much unlearning everything we've ever been taught, which to me is really about questioning and being curious.
And you say, like, sitting with the silence, and it sounds so spa like, but I will tell you, it's rough.
Yeah.
It's difficult. And it is at times really dark to sit with yourself in the quiet. Some days are not as bad as others. And some days you just feel lost.
Yeah.
Like,
I think a big key to this, and I'm so grateful you're talking about it in this way, because I think a lot of times people will say something like, I don't know how to meditate, or I don't know how to be quiet, because they think meditation is about quieting the mind or having this beautiful, blissful experience. Sometimes it is a brutal experience, and we might
mm-hmm.
label that as a
Yeah.
bad experience. But the truth is, that one is as rich as the blissful experience. Because for many of us, about 100% of the people I've ever met, we've spent time running away from our emotions, running away from being in our bodies, running away from our thoughts. So being in the silence and being able to observe that and feel all of the unfelt trauma, because that's really, we're so busy externalizing, and a big part of it is because we don't want to be present and feel. And so, in the work that I do with conscious recovery, I invite the possibility that the greatest trauma healing we can do is learning to be present with ourselves, even if it's for 3 minutes. Working with
Yes.
people new in recovery who haven't really been with themselves for 3 minutes, and the trauma of the 7-year-old or the 8-year-old where they ran away to protect themselves. It was a brilliant strategy that saved them. And then it becomes an unconscious or automatic response when things are difficult. So learning how to be present with ourselves, whether it feels really wonderful or whether it's one of those where I just notice that my thoughts are just like berating me. All of that is
Hmm.
useful because we get to see ourselves and know ourselves.
Yeah. And, we, during the 90s, self help was about having positive, happy thoughts and creating a positive, happy life. And it just didn't do enough. And here recently, I have been tapping into releasing. And, when I started therapy, me and my partner first went to couples therapy, then I started going by myself. And she was like, "Do you believe he loves you?"
Mm,
And at this point, I was so humbled by what I had done to him that my answer was, I don't know. And it was as honest as I could be. And she said, "Do you believe anybody loves you?" And I said,
mm,
I, I don't know.
yeah.
And she was like, "What do you know?" And I was like, "That I don't know."
Mm,
Like, that's as basic as it is. Like, I don't know how I feel. I don't know how others feel. I have ran so hard from feelings. Yet at the same time, I wanted to read every book about feelings,
yeah.
but in an intellectual level and not in an emotional level.
Right.
Um, I didn't like feelings because I couldn't connect where feelings were coming from.
Right.
So most of my feelings were angry.
Yeah, and
And
it's very common, I think, for all men that we are allowed to be angry, but some of the other feelings, and even if we were never directly told it, there is a message for men that, you can be angry and you can be really strong and brave and all these different things, but the emotion that we're allowed to have, if anger is even an emotion, we can go into that. I'm sure it is, but it's also a strategy, right? And it's managing
yes,
something much deeper. So when someone's angry, we send them to anger management. And instead, what we want to do is ask what the anger is managing. And almost always it's feelings like sadness. It's feelings that are much deeper than the anger. The anger is trying to manage it, just like anxiety is an unconscious strategy to manage deeper emotions often. And so I love what you're saying, because the process of thawing out, if you will, is allowing ourselves to feel that which we weren't able to feel before. And some of it is so deep. If we have, listen, everyone has trauma if you were born on planet
yeah,
Earth. There's no getting around that, because, being a little kid watching war on TV, I remember seeing the war on TV when I was a little kid. I remember all the different layers, the way men in my life talked about women, the way my grandfather talked about people of color in such a derogatory way. All of this was bombarding me, and that alone is a traumatic experience. Then I
hmm,
had other experiences that most people would know are traumatic, but it's all unfelt because fight, flight, freeze. Now we have fawn, but I froze. I remember freezing. And so when things were difficult as an adult, I would check out and I would lose time even. I would I don't even remember the last few hours. Like, where was I? Right. I literally would
hmm,
emotionally check out. So learning how to feel was a process for me, and just allowing myself to become aware of what I'm feeling. I remember when I was in my 20s and early recovery, I got sober young at 20 years old. My therapist would say, "Where do you feel that in your body?" And I thought, what are you talking about? I mean, I had an intellectual understanding of what he was asking, but it took us, I would say, 7, 8, 9 sessions before I could say, well, it feels tight here, or I feel a tingling here, or I notice my muscles are tensing up. Like, it took that long. And then as I, started to unravel more and more, I was able to say, what did it feel like when I was 6 years old? And what did I do with that emotion? And how can I create a safe place for myself now to have those feelings that were associated with the experience? And I think it's important that we start with, there's no such thing as a negative emotion. We tend to think there are certain, and you spoke to, a lot of this kind of new thought movement, if you will, or new age movement. There's like, everyone just be happy. And it was in the 70s, it was in the 80s, it was in the 90s, and it's still around, right? And the deeper work is, yes, that's great. We want to focus on the positive, and we don't want to pretend like we're not feeling something that we would call a negative emotion, even though there's absolutely no such thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think allowing that to come up and realizing that until you let those things come up from where you've buried them, um, you can't release them.
That's
You
right.
can't let it go. And I had this little moment with a psychic. I love some woo woo stuff. And it was after my friend passed last year. I was taking care of a friend that had cancer. And the psychic was like, I see all these bags of things that you just can't get rid of. Like, you keep going through the bags, doing inventory of how you've been wronged, and you keep doing inventory. And my grandmother was so sweet to me and loved me in spite of the beautiful little sissy boy that I was. And she was like, your grandmother's here,
Mm,
and she wants to tell you that it's not your job to do inventory anymore. The bags are here for you to let them go and release them.
mm,
That she's so sorry these things happened to you, and she wished she had known better here to let them. And it was like, for the first time, I thought about the trauma and the things that had been done to me, that the power was now mine to release them and let them go.
mm,
I was the one holding the bags and doing the inventory and going through it over and over and over again. And sometimes I would get angry, and I knew it wasn't my fault on an intellectual level, but emotionally, I had never let myself just feel sorry for myself. I had never just said, I didn't fucking deserve this. And I was done wrong. Like, I had intellectualized everything and processed it that way.
yeah. And
And
and there's a couple of things, and I'm going to invite a different possibility into the conversation if you're willing. Rather than the idea of we want to let this go, what if we were to say, I'm going to learn how to be with it and live with it and integrate it into my life? And I'll tell you why I'm saying this. If we look at addiction in its simplest form, addiction in its simplest form is, I don't want to be here and I don't want to feel. I don't want to feel this. I don't want to experience this. I want to
mm-hmm,
experience that over there. And then we become addicted to that. So the idea of, I need to be rid of this, might be an addictive thought. Instead, we might want to say, okay, this is what happened. This is what I decided about myself and the world. This is what I absorbed from these things
mm-hmm,
that happened that were not even mine, right? Like, I did
yes.
not, that happened. Yes, it happened to me. And now it's my responsibility to work with that. And so rather than saying I need to let it go, because like sometimes, for example, in recovery circles, we'll
I just
hear
mean
people,
releasing that, the weight of it that I
yeah,
have hid, I pushed
yeah.
down. As far
And
as the wounded child will never be unwounded.
well, okay.
Um,
So it's interesting because that can be true, but we can also be free from it,
yes,
right? It can lose its
yes,
power over us, right? It's
yes.
not, because I do hear people saying things like, I'll never heal this. And I want to say, well, what if you can? Right. And so in some ways, it's like almost like this paradoxical conversation, or this seeming
Well, when I
contrast
hear
of,
that, I
well,
think of it can't, what has done can't be undone. But yes, like our approach to it and what we do with it
yeah,
and how we feel about it.
because what we can do, and this is where I like to be provocative, and I will say, what I'll ask it as a question: what if we can change the past? And I'm going to explain what I mean by that, because we basically have all decided, well, you can't change what happened, but what you can do is X, Y, and Z, which is true. But the issue with that is, the question I have, I guess I'll put it that way, is if it's true that it's less about what happened and more about what we decided and absorbed, and because we either shut down or we fight, flight, or freeze, right? That became our automatic response. We can actually go back and care for the younger self and heal it from that place. And in a way, it actually does change the experience. So in a way, then it's like, well, you just said we're not really going to let it go, but now you're saying we can actually change it. But it's very interesting in that it's a nuanced conversation. The more I integrate and embrace what is, the more I'm able to actually change it. Instead of resisting, I work with it, I flow with it. And then in that way, we discover freedom in the midst of it. And I think that is a really important message to share with people,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't want, there was a person on social media that kind of went back and forth on, in the comment section, we know how it is, but she said, how dare you say people can heal from treatment, or from trauma? Because brain science is now showing us that the brain is permanently damaged from trauma. That's not actually what brain science is showing us.
Uh-huh.
It's showing that the brain can actually heal itself over time. We have neuroplasticity of the brain, and it's way more than just the brain, but we actually can heal the trauma. It doesn't necessarily mean we'll be rid of it forever or that we have to let it go. We might have opportunities to work with it at a deeper level, but I want to always say we can heal these wounds, these deeper wounds.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I see that. Like I've had moments lately that after meditating and journaling, and sometimes my journaling is simply, I don't fucking want to write in this journal. I don't feel like this today, blah, 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 getting the noise out.
Yeah.
And which has been great in one point at some points because I have found myself sitting thinking, wow, it's quiet
Mm,
because the noise has been like regurgitated on those pages or in my journal app.
yeah.
But there was a moment on the treadmill and I did a TikTok video about this, but I just heard this little voice go, I want to play ball. Why did you never teach me to play ball like the
Mm,
other boys? And I had to be, because I was scared of the other boys.
right.
So I just never learned to throw a ball. And this year at 44, I have learned to throw a ball and catch a ball. And it was hearing that inner child in just a really profound way that these were things that were in my control and that I sheltered myself from because I didn't want to get hurt.
That's right.
But now I'm big enough and old enough and strong enough that I could still learn to throw a ball, and I did, and it was fun. And
Yeah, and then we're reparenting, right? And that can be a process, but there can be these profound moments of awakening where we realize that we can shift. We actually can change the relationship. And you said it so perfectly to me, and that is, fear prevented me from connection that I wanted. Fear prevented me from doing this. And when I was a little kid, it was really, don't look like a girl, don't walk like a girl, don't talk like a girl, don't act like a girl. Like there was something wrong with me because of the way I presented. So I closed down and I
oh
shut
yeah,
down
yeah.
and shut off. And like, relationships with men were very challenging for me because I was afraid of being with the other boys, right? So there are always so many layers. And I love that you're saying, I listened to that little boy within me, and then I actually did something with that. And that's where we start to reprogram ourselves and heal ourselves. And it can be such a simple process in some ways. And yet most of us, or many of us, have been running away from listening to that inner child, or listening to that place that's unharmable, that's even beyond that essence.
Hmm.
So learning how to listen is so powerful.
And you know, I've told people the biggest thing that I have learned my inner child needs is to trust me.
That's right.
I was not trustworthy for many years because I shielded him from trying things that I was afraid he wasn't good at. I didn't let him attempt things that I was afraid he would get hurt in. And I just really didn't always have his back, and he wasn't able to trust me.
Yeah.
And the relationship for me with that little boy is I want him to trust me, and I want him to know I've got his back. And if we fail at something, so what? We'll keep trying. Like, I really do view him in the same ways that I look at my son.
Yeah.
And, my son is 19 now, and it's, it's a lot like parenting a child,
Yep.
except this time you were not a great parent for most of this child's life, and now you're having to build that relationship, whereas with my son it was always a great relationship.
Yeah.
um,
That's so powerful because in my work, when I work with the inner child process, there are three things that I invite people to say to the inner child. One, it's okay to feel, right? It's okay to feel that. It's safe for you now, and I'm here for you. And that third one, I'm here for you, is rebuilding trust, right? Because as you
mhm.
said, many of us have abandoned that inner child, whether that's addiction, whatever that is, we abandon that. And a lot of times, we think we're protecting that, but really we're abandoning it. And when I say it, I mean that wounded self or that inner child. And so rebuilding trust with ourselves, with that inner child, that naturally allows us to start building trust with the world. And once there's a safety created to feel and to reconnect, miraculous things start to happen. We're not as concerned with working on things in the external, because if it starts with the deeper inner work, then as you said at the beginning of the show, then our relationships start to get much better. A big part of it is because, all of us have the experience of desire. All of us have the experience of wanting love and connection. It's when I'm out of touch with who I really am, and then I'm looking to, whether it's a partner or a job or a friend, whatever that is, to try to heal that becomes a dynamic. Another human can't do that for me. So as I do the deeper healing, then a relationship becomes about exchange, and that's completely different. A
Yeah,
completely
yeah,
different
yeah,
way
yeah.
of being in a relationship.
you know because we can only connect with others as deeply as we connect with ourselves. And
Exactly.
then this week I heard someone say we we find people that, I guess, as far as what you're teaching, is they're on the same frequency, and that is where we find each other. Like
That's
when
right.
we are operating in the same trauma responses, and you don't see it in that person until you start to grow. And
Right.
then, like I told you before we started this, like peeling off some of those friendships are really difficult, friendships
Yeah.
throughout your
And
life, but you're not connecting in the same ways, and you're not vibrating at the same
yeah.
place anymore. And it's a really confusing place. Healing is not so fucking clean cut. I
And it's
wouldn't
not
turn
for
around
faint
and
of heart, that's for sure.
but this is how I know that it's good, is I wouldn't turn around and go back.
That's right. And as we
Although I
as we start to work on our own healing and changing our own vibration, those friendships do either shift, right? Either, wow, that person really showed up in a way that I'm very surprised, in a beautiful way, or there's a frequency that changes and people just float away, right? I myself haven't had as much of a need to like abruptly end relationships, or what we call setting boundaries, because like as the vibration starts to change, there's no longer congruency, and they don't want to be in my life and I don't want to be in theirs, and we can lovingly, part. And then there are other times, and it has happened with me, and I hear for a lot of other people, where we have to make a conscious choice to step away. And that can be one of the hardest things for some of us. And that's that fawn piece, in the fight, flight, freeze fawn. It's kind of like, let me take care of you, let me stay in this relationship, even though I know on a very deep level it's not
yeah,
serving me or you, but we stay in sort of codependently, if you will. So all of this gets to come to the surface for us to see.
absolutely. Because I know for one of my relationships that for months I had told my therapist, this, I know this is happening. I know this is ending. I know this is not going to serve me anymore in the ways that it served me. But then when it ended, it was still really hard.
Yeah.
Um, because I had processed it intellectually, but those fucking feelings, like that has been the thing I'm learning is to to feel what I'm feeling, figure out where it's coming from, and sometimes you just can't figure out where it's coming from like that. There are times I just have to feel it and tell myself it's okay. Like it's okay that you're feeling this, and it's valid that
That
you're feeling this.
I think that's the important piece, right? The way I frame it is, what would I be experiencing without the story? Right? Because so many of us, as you said, like a strategy of intellectualizing the emotions, we might say, where is this coming from? But instead, the question might be, how do I feel this right now and allow myself to feel? So a
Yes.
very young child naturally feels their emotions. That's just a natural, innate way of being human. They're in this sense of joy. Something happens. They, stomp or yell and scream or cry. And then if we let them feel it, within a minute or two, they go right back to the joy. But then as we get older, we end up being taught things like, you can't feel that. Go to your room so you can stop crying. All the layers of the things we learn to
Yes.
suppress. So if we allow ourselves to feel without going into the intellect, let me just feel this. I don't need to try to figure it out. The practice of that feeling is actually the practice of what's innate in the human experience. We're going back to our early self. And it's interesting to me, like what people are looking for in a spiritual practice, what people are looking for in therapy, what people are looking for in recovery is really to have kind of the experience of being 2 years old, more presence, more connection, more openness, learning how to feel my feelings. We actually know how to do it. It's just our mind is in this whole process of like, oh, I can't do that. But it's actually profoundly simple. It doesn't necessarily mean it's easy, but it's profoundly simple.
Oh yeah. I mean, just trying to to undo all the doing that we've done.
Yeah.
To, I know for me, it was, I walked like a girl, so I learned to walk a little different. I
Yeah.
learned to change my voice because my voice sounded too effeminate. I learned
Right.
to not make certain gestures. And then during this, like, really like trying to get authentic and be real and who am I, it's like I've created such a chaos of walk like this, talk like this, hold your hands like this, don't do this, like you can't like that, you can't love this. And just unraveling all those things is, it's like a floor full of wires and they're all tied together and
Yep.
you just got to sit and undo them.
Yep.
And that's hard. I'm not a very patient person. My husband is, he could put something together and take it apart 100 times and have a smile on his face the whole time. He could read the, no, he doesn't read instructions, but he would put it together. Or if he makes something, he will make, you know, a temporary thing out of cheaper wood and then build the real one at the end. I don't have that patience. I'm like, meh, fuck this. So undoing Christmas lights and wires is tough, but I'm learning to sit with all these things that I have done and undo the things I've done. And
Yeah.
it's,
And so much of it is being present. I remember early in my recovery, I read Thich Nhat Hanh for the first time, and I think it was the book The Miracle of Mindfulness, where he was just inviting us to, like, when you're washing the dishes. We really don't wash dishes anymore, but throw them in the dishwasher. But whatever we're doing, can I really experience it? Right? Can I really hear what you're saying right now, or am I responding in my mind? Right? Can I feel the warm water on my hands when I'm washing my hands? Can I feel my feet touching the ground when I'm walking? All of these, what might be considered basic mindfulness practices really are profound, because we start to become more present. We start to access, seeming parts of ourselves that we might have abandoned. And then we start to realize that being truly present is kind of the only way to be. I remember Mary Helen, who was my first mentor, she was incredible. She would say, living one day at a time is the easy part. Living in the moment is the deeper work. And I was like, oh, yeah, 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 that sounds great. On to the next thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until years later that I'm like, oh, living in the moment, like truly being in the moment, that's not like related to the second hand on the clock, but truly being present is a completely different way of being. And when I do that, it's like time evaporates and there's a degree of connection, awe, and wonder that happens that I hadn't experienced except for when I was really young. It was like you were talking earlier about going back and remembering that little kid, that joy-filled kid. That's really still who and what we are.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I mean, even further than that, like Eckhart Tolle in the book A New Earth, when he talks about we look at a flower and instead of really being present with the flower, we name the flower. And as
Right.
soon as we name it, we're done with it
That's right.
because the name carries all the facts. And instead of just really looking at the veins and the petals and the different colors, and we look at bugs and just the most simple things, and being present is not even to name them, just to observe and just
Yeah.
to feel. And that is, it's a beautiful place to be, but it's a hard place to stay at.
Mm. I think
um
for me, it's like it's a hard place to stay at until I stay there and realize the profound shift in the nature of what I thought it meant to be human. And when I get to that place, I'm like, wow, being with this flower is so much more rich than naming this flower or trying to figure it out. Right.
uh-huh.
And like in Taoism, they say once you call it the Tao, it's no longer the Tao, meaning like once I label something, and that's, that's what religion does. They try to put a framework around a spiritual experience, and then people become attached to the framework instead of the experience. Right. So then it becomes dogmatic rules. And Eckhart Tolle, I love, he says, we are in an era where we're moving beyond concepts and ideology, to move beyond ideology and live in curiosity. That's a very different way of being. And then I think about that when you look at all the, whether it's an argument in a relationship or a war between nations, at the root of it is the ego of I'm right and you're wrong, this is mine, you can't take it. True presence allows us to move beyond that, those attachments to that. And some people will say, well, how on earth would we be able to do that? Well, the way we do that, Lao Tzu told us this thousands of years ago. The greatest gift I can offer the world is that of my own transformation. When I really
Hmm.
understand that, then everything changes. And then it's like, oh, actually, being present is much easier than being stuck in my mind. It's much easier and it's much more rich.
Yeah, it's all a practice right now.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I'm in the throes of it.
Yeah.
I'm in the throes of that place of I'm not there yet, but I wouldn't turn around and go back.
Yeah.
And that is sometimes a really confusing dark place. And but I say a dark place, but with so much added bliss that I didn't have before, because there is silence that I never heard before, there is beauty that I never saw before, and there's a peacefulness even in the dark moments where
That's
I'm confused and I don't understand um, what I'm feeling. I don't understand why this situation, and there's a peace in knowing I don't have to.
That's right. Because we tend to think of, like, for example, the word disoriented. We have a negative attachment to that word, but
Mm-hmm.
disoriented means we're reorienting ourselves to a totally different way of seeing the world. And so it's through the grief, it's through the sadness, it's through the experience of now, whether that's joy, connection, or heartache and grief. All of those experiences lead us to this place of freedom, and that freedom isn't trying to get rid of, it's being with whatever's present. And I love the way you're framing it, because it's like, I'm not there yet, but that's also our mind saying there is a there to be at, right? And I don't want to get
Yeah.
overly esoteric, but we're all here, right? There is no,
Mm-hmm.
the way I say it is, what if this is the most enlightened you'll ever be? What now? What? Right? Because we have an idea that there's going to be this finish line. And I certainly have often thought that and find my mind doing that every single day. Once I get this, oh yeah, gentle reminder that I'm here.
Oh wow, that's good. Like I need to take that in right now because it is true. Like that is my thinking is someday when I get
Yeah,
there. And what if this is it? What if this peacefulness I'm talking about, what if that is the place? But I'm so wired to think that everything has a next level
right.
and a next step, and if this is the place, I'm okay with that.
That's right. And everything is okay in this moment. Everything is rich in this moment. This moment holds within it everything that we require for our own awakening. Awakening happens now, and everything I just said could be like a bumper sticker, but it's also a very profound truth of like, this is the moment. Here we are,
Mhm.
right? And you and I are here in this together, experiencing this. And that is not getting rid of the ego, is just a glimpse into something beyond it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really beautiful to think that I have come to this place of peace when there, like I said a year ago, I was at the ocean and I didn't even know how to look at the ocean and take it all
Mhm.
in. I
Yeah,
would walk the beach and couldn't feel the sand because I couldn't take the time to notice the
yeah,
sand.
right.
And yeah, and it
I,
just feels like so much has changed and so much is changing.
yeah,
But yeah, I'm just really waking up to the things that would have impressed that little boy
yeah,
and would have put
beautiful.
him in awe. Ah, thank you for that. Like, I needed to hear that because
Yeah,
I was getting ready for just locking my shit up in the dark, and I was like, oh, fuck, how long is this going to last? Because I was looking to get out of it. Like, let's go, let's go. But now I look at, but it really is a peaceful place. And I am looking at the world differently. I'm viewing others differently. And I'm setting boundaries for myself that I never set before. Like that has been a really amazing thing. So if someone's listening today and they're like, these two dudes are not so full of shit, where would you recommend they start? Um, like, are there books you would recommend? Is there, I think your website is a great place to start. It's really inspiring and it's positive, and you just have just a compassion in your voice. There's a tone that is easy to listen to.
thank you. I think in some ways the path is unique for each of us, and in other ways we're all on this exact same path, right? So for some it's community. Community was a big thing for me, finding not a group of like-minded people, but of like-spirited people, people who were really dedicated to awakening to a greater reality, right? So, I mean, I could name the books that transformed my life. Of course, I have three books that I would recommend to someone on their journey. If you're a person in recovery, conscious recovery, I hope will help someone access a different part of themselves. You know, Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth is one of my very favorites, so I always recommend
It's
that.
deep though. That's some deep shit.
It's deep, and it resonates at a very deep level. As a matter of fact, I heard Eckhart talking about when he had the power of presence, right? Is that what it's called?
Uh-huh.
Like, the power of now. The power of
Yeah.
now, which was such a great book, and he thought his mind thought that A New Earth wouldn't be commercially successful because it was so deep, and yet that's the one that exploded. So that tells us that we're resonating. Consciousness on planet Earth is resonating with that vibration, right? I mean,
Yes.
uh, so it's interesting what the mind does. Yes, it's a very deep book. I know my friend read it, he's like, too many words. So it's
Well,
like,
I listen to all books, and I will say that book is sort of. I laid in the pool one day, um, and just floated and listened, and for some reason, the book gave me permission to just hear it, like
yeah,
not understand, not figure out, but just to hear it, and it became almost like a song
yeah,
that was in the background, and I noticed I was looking at literally the drops of water
That's right.
and the bugs. And that day, a dragonfly came several times and landed on my finger.
It's
And I would
amazing.
talk to the dragonfly. And it was really so now I can listen to it in the car. It is some deep shit. That is the me that is trying to go. Y'all don't think I'm too weird when you listen to A New Earth, but it is. He does give permission in the beginning just to hear it
Yeah.
and not try to figure it out. So, yeah.
Yeah.
What is that third book?
What's the third book? Did I say there was another book I was gonna? I love Pema Chodron. Her books are amazing. When Things Fall Apart is such a great book. I love Byron Katie. Her work is incredible. Her book Loving What Is. I mean, I could name so many different books that have been transformational, and all of that is an important part. And ultimately, it really is about getting quiet enough to hear, right? To listen to that inner voice, that still voice that can be so powerful and guide the way. So there are a lot of different paths in terms of like a teaching that we will resonate with. I know when I read A New Earth, it just resonated with my soul very deeply, but
Mm-hmm.
for another person, it might be something else. So I think there are many different pathways to get there.
Yeah, I just like I was telling you, you're friends with the author of The Velvet Rage, and all of us that have read it, we have this thing where we say, "Oh, the book will find you when you're ready,"
That's right.
and it's so true. The book was eye opening for me, and it was the most seen I've ever felt. But yeah,
Mhm.
it's one of those books that I believe it will find you when you're ready, and it will resonate with you when you get to that place. But
Yeah.
and then you talked about meditation and how we all have this idea of meditation of just quiet, blank, levitating gurus. And how would you suggest someone start to
Well,
meditate?
for me, there is something powerful about being in a group of people meditating. So if it's something that you feel called to do, yes, you can try it on your own. I know in the 21st century, we have a lot of apps, but for me, being in the room with people who are dedicated to spending some time in the
This
silence is so
Alabama, it's hard to
powerful.
find a group.
Yeah, you can't find it.
Like, I mean, there may be some. I don't
Well,
think it's.
here's the great news. If you can't find it, what am I going to say? Then you can start it.
I thought you were going to say move.
No, I
Um,
wasn't going to say move. I mean, that could be a choice too, but like if it's not there, what would it be like to create that, right? What would it be like to
yeah,
start a meditation group in your where you live? I mean,
I
I live in
I
LA.
don't.
You can walk anywhere and find a meditation group. I mean, it's
Yeah, yeah,
literally
you
everywhere
can.
here.
I mean, and we see it when we travel, like Chicago. There was, we were just in Chicago maybe a few weeks ago, and there was yoga in the park, and it was just like a
Yeah.
thousand people doing yoga. But
Yeah.
I did know that we were in the park here downtown the other day, and they were doing like some fitness classes and stuff. I guess I should research. I've just been meditating on my own and listening to guided meditations.
Which is so
Um,
great too, and maybe having a community might not be a next step for you. It might just be because I'm really I'm very community based. I love community, so I love connecting with other people.
Me too.
That doesn't mean it's everyone's path, but that has worked for me to accelerate. Being part of the agape movement here in Los Angeles, that accelerated my spiritual growth. And
What
earlier
is
in my
that?
life,
Like a
Agape, Michael Beckwith. I don't know if you know who Michael Beckwith is. He was in the movie The
mm-mm.
Secret. He's a friend of mine. He's the founder of Agape International. I would, if you want a powerful like teacher, I think he's incredible. His book Life Visioning is absolutely wonderful. It's funny when you were talking earlier about um, listening to A New Earth and not necessarily understanding it all, but you were absorbing it in some way. I remember talking to someone. They said, I've been going to Agape for 5 years and I never had any idea what Michael was talking about. I was just here for the energy. And today I think I heard him. for the first time. And I love that, right? Just here for the
Is it like a
energy.
church or?
It's a new thought community. So it is in the way that it's structured. There is a Sunday morning service, there is music, so it can look and feel like church, but the teaching is really very profound. So I would highly recommend people look up Agape International Spiritual Center in Los Angeles. Yeah, so that's to me, it's like connection with teachers. Find a teacher you resonate with, listen to them. But ultimately, I like to say when the student is ready, the teacher appears. We hear that a lot, but I add
Uh-huh.
to it, when the student is really ready, the teacher disappears, right? We find a teacher and maybe we work with them for a while, and then there's a place where it's like, oh, now it's time for me to move beyond that. Not that I've outgrown them in some way, but maybe it's a little bit different part of my path. So there's so many opportunities. We live in a beautifully rich time of consciousness where there's a lot of opportunities to listen to a lot of people talking about consciousness and the evolution of consciousness.
Yeah, it's all it kind of draws me to it now when I hear people talk, and
Yeah.
it's a lot like church language. They have their own verbiage, and for an outsider, you're just like, "What?" But
Yeah.
yeah, I think if you can find the people that can simplify things and speak to you in a way that you can hear it
Yeah.
is so important.
That's
But
always been my dedication, right? I've wanted, like, especially my first book, Conscious Being, I wanted to write a book that's in the simplest language possible to talk about these pretty profound or very profound spiritual awarenesses that changed my life. How do I do it like you and I are sitting down having a conversation, right? I have always wanted to write in that language. And of course, my ego mind looks at it and is like, oh my gosh, my writing, I sound like a sixth grader. And then I remind myself, oh yeah, that's what I wanted. I wanted it to be
yeah,
like
yeah,
accessible, right? So there's just so many different pathways, so many different ways to reach the inner journey, because ultimately this is an individual journey of returning to our true nature, but it's also a collective journey that we get to do together.
yeah. And I think, you talk about simplifying the profound, but I think the most simple is the profound. Like
Exactly.
the more profound it is, it's really the most basic, simple concept of experiencing things and being present to things and listening internally to yourself. It's really that the simplest needs of that inner child,
Yeah.
instead of trying to make it some big confusing mess. Like it's really tapping back into just the simplicity of that child's needs and wants and desires.
Absolutely.
And so yeah, I think it's really beautiful what you're doing, and I would love to catch up with you as you are teaching things, and when you have books coming out, like share with everybody what they can find at your website and what you offer as
Thank
far as
you. Yeah.
teaching and
Yeah, tjwoodward.com. I have three books: Conscious Being, Conscious Recovery, and Conscious Creation. They all have workbooks, they all have courses. I'm actually just launching a conscious creation group coaching practice. It's an online 8 module course and then a weekly group coaching session with me over Zoom. This is something brand new for me. I'm excited about that. Conscious creation is really about how do I overcome how do I make peace with the past and overcome these ideas and beliefs and the frequency that I've been carrying so that I can listen to my inner wisdom and create the life of my dreams from the inside out. So that's there. I have a lot of videos. I love doing speaking events. So you can find that all on TJ Woodward.
all right. Well, I thank you for this today, and I'm actually going to start one of your books and the workbook with it. I really have enjoyed hearing your talks and
Thank
what you're
you.
teaching and how simple and compassionate you are when you're teaching it. So I want to thank you for being here. I know everybody will be excited to go and check out your website and look at the tools you're offering. I thank you, TJ, and hopefully we can do this really soon. And you're
Absolutely. Thank you
inspiring.
so much. Thank you. I so appreciate our time together.
All right. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to share with your friends and family. Also, if you have comments, questions, or maybe you want to share your story, you can email me at raginghardonpodcast@gmail.com.